Portions of this video contain unlicensed and copyrighted material. The views expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the views of the copyright holders of such material. Missing Links is not held in copyright and may be freely distributed in any format and through any medium. No profits may ever be made from the sale or reproduction of this video.
Two suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge.
The Lavon Affair was an Israeli terrorist operation in Egypt known as Operation Susanna, in which Egyptian, American, and British-owned targets in Egypt were bombed in the summer of 1954. In the early 1950s, the U.S. was becoming friendlier with Egypt and was moving to influence the British to leave the Egyptian Suez Canal, which they had manned for almost 20 years. The apartheid state of Israel would not tolerate the British leaving, and elements within Israel began planning a variety of terrorist attacks on British, Egyptian, and American targets. These attacks would then be blamed on so-called Muslim extremists. This would incite the anger of the British and the Americans towards Egypt and Islam and sour the burgeoning relationship between Egypt, America, and Britain. This plan for a series of false flag terrorist attacks was codenamed Operation Susanna. A group of Egyptian Jews was recruited to carry out the attacks. Jews in the diaspora that are recruited are known as Sayanim. The first bomb went off on July 2nd when a post office in Alexandria was firebombed. On the 11th of July, the Anglo-Egyptian Suez negotiations, which had been blocked for 9 months, got underway again. Despite the British assuring Israel that stockpiled weapons would not be given to the Egyptians, on July 14th, the Jewish terrorists firebombed U.S. information agency libraries in Cairo and Alexandria. However, that same day, a phosphorus bomb exploded prematurely in one of the terrorists, Philip Natansen's, pocket just as he was about to enter the British-owned Rio Cinema in Alexandria. His arrest and the subsequent confession led to the breakup of the whole ring. However, while the plot was being investigated, the Zionist Jewish terrorists started fires in 2 Cairo cinemas, in the Central Post Office, and the railway station. After the plot was uncovered, many tried to spin it as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. These ad hominem attacks are a common tactic of the Zionists. For more information on this, please read the Jewish American patriot Jack Bernstein's book, The Life of an American Jew in Racist, Marxist Israel. This honest, honorable, and courageous Jew was subsequently assassinated by Mossad. As the trial of the Jewish terrorists became more and more public, Israel was forced to do damage control. They claimed that the Egyptians were tipped off and allowed the attacks to happen. They also singularly scapegoated the defense minister Pinhas Lavon to prevent the exposure of the real group inside the apartheid state of Israel who planned Operation Susanna and several other false flag terrorist attacks. But this would not be the last time America's so-called ally and friend and recipient of over $150 billion in aid, would attack her.
It looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown up.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
June 8, 1967 was a clear, sunny day with unlimited visibility. It was such a nice day that as the USS Liberty floated in international waters 14 miles north of the Sinai Peninsula, sailors were sunbathing on the spy ship's deck.
But all wasn't as tranquil as a sunny day would convey, for June 8th also marked the fourth day of the Six-Day War, which involved Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan.
Monitoring this situation was the USS Liberty, a World War II freighter that had been converted into a spy vessel by the NSA, the National Security Agency. In fact, the Liberty was the most sophisticated and identifiable intelligence ship in the world at the time, with dozens of large antennas, state-of-the-art electronic intercept equipment, moon-bound satellite dishes, massive aerials, plus a TRSS comm system that sent real-time messages to the Pentagon. The Liberty also flew a large 5-by-8-foot American flag, was freshly painted with large white numbers and letters on its bow and hull, and contained no offensive weaponry except for 4 50-caliber machine guns for defensive purposes.
These details are important to keep in mind because at 8 o'clock a.m., as the Liberty floated in international waters at less than 5 knots with a 5-by-8-foot American flag furling in the wind, a squadron of Israeli jets circled the ship at least a dozen times. These reconnaissance planes flew at such low levels, as close as 200 feet, that the sailors aboard the Liberty actually waved to the Israeli pilots. And, as we will show later in this documentary, those commanding these Israeli jets not only ID'd this ship as being of American origin, they also positively ID'd it as being the USS Liberty.
Despite being fully aware of its status, at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, 3 unmarked Israeli Mystir and Mirage 3 fighter jets pummeled the Liberty with rockets and cannon fire. These bombers initially went after the ship's antenna and electronics dishes, in the process filling the American flag full of holes. As sailors fled for cover, Liberty crewmen hoisted a new, even larger 7-by-13-foot flag into the air. But this new, even larger flag didn't stop the Israeli onslaught as they sprayed the Liberty with napalm, the highly incendiary substance burning the sailors' flesh.
While this unprovoked act of war was taking place, radio operators aboard the Liberty tried to signal for help, but their SOS distress messages were not heard because the Israelis had deliberately jammed all 5 of the Liberty's emergency radio channels, a phenomenon that shows quite clearly that the interfering party was aware of their target beforehand and had previously zeroed in on it, for to jam a stranger's radio in such a rapid manner is virtually impossible.
Unable to get help, the USS Liberty, with 8 sailors already dead and 100 wounded, including Commander William McGonigal, was a sitting duck for the Israelis, who at 2:24 p.m. sent in 3 torpedo boats loaded with thousands of pounds of explosives. With their target already in flames, the Israelis bombed the Liberty with shells, quickly killing 25 more men.
As firefighters and medical personnel tried to put out fires and save their ship and crew, they were repeatedly machine-gunned by Israeli aircraft. By 3:15 p.m., after it was apparent that the Israelis didn't want to leave a single man alive, the crew abandoned ship. But as the surviving crewmen fled for their lives, Israeli warships at close range sprayed those rafts aboard the ship with gunfire, along with those carrying the wounded that had already been lowered into the water. It was a sickening display of brutality and savage inhumanity, a total lack of regard for human life. The Israelis wanted no survivors.
When word eventually reached the White House, President Lyndon Baines Johnson assumed that it was the Egyptians attacking our ship, so he immediately dispatched air support, which would have reached the Liberty in 40 minutes. But then, when LBJ discovered that it was in fact the Israelis who were attacking our vessel, he immediately called off the rescue.
In other words, Phantom jets already en route from the 6th Fleet were ordered to turn around and return to their point of origin. Try to let the seriousness of this situation sink in for a moment. Navy fighters launched from the aircraft carriers USS Saratoga and USS America were recalled by the White House.
But the blame doesn't stop there. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara and National Security Advisor Walter Rostow at first ordered instantaneous retaliation, but upon discovering that the attack originated from Israel's Haifa base, McNamara called off the exercise. In fact, it was reported later that Robert McNamara was so irate when discovering that Liberty radio men contacted the USS America that he barked, "Tell the 6th Fleet to get those aircraft back immediately." Due to this traitorous behavior, the USS Liberty had to wait 16 hours after the attack stopped before they were rescued by our military forces. It is the only instance in American naval history that a rescue mission was aborted while an American ship was under attack.
In all, the Israeli attack on America's USS Liberty, a ship that sat almost motionless in the water with no offensive weaponry while sailors sunbathed on its deck, lasted for 2 full hours, equaling the length of Japan's infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. 821 holes were found in the ship, resulting from aircraft rockets, cannon fire, and torpedo blasts, while over 3,000 holes from Israel's machine gun fire were also counted.
Far more tragically, the Israelis killed 34 Americans that fateful day, wounded 171 more, and instigated the worst U.S. naval losses since World War II. And even though U.S. Secretary of State Dean Rusk and Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Thomas Moore called this attack deliberate, to this day not one guilty party in Israel or the U.S. has been brought to justice.
Well, the thoughts that always come back to us time and time again is how this thing is still being covered up after 40 years. And we know without doubt from the circumstances that it was a deliberate attack. Anyone who looks carefully at the details knows that it was deliberate, and that includes such people as Dean Rusk, as Secretary of State, and all of the heads of all of the intelligence organizations.
Will the record show that the statements of Mr. Ennis are correct? Here are a few quotes for your consideration. On the strength of intercept transcripts of pilots' conversations during the attack, the question of the attack's deliberateness just wasn't a disputed issue within the agency. Lieutenant General William E. Odom, former Director, National Security Agency, interview with David Walsh on March 3rd, 2003, reported in Naval Institute Proceedings, June 2003. Inman said he flatly rejected the Crystal thesis that the attack was an accident. Quote, "It is just exceedingly difficult to believe that the USS Liberty was not correctly identified, based on talks with NSA seniors at the time having direct knowledge of intercepted communications. No NSA official could be found who dissented from the deliberate conclusion." Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, United States Navy, Director, National Security Agency, 1977 to 1981, reported in Proceedings, June 2003. Quote, "I can tell you for an absolute certainty from intercepted communications that they knew they were attacking an American ship," unquote. Oliver Kirby, former Deputy Director for Operations and Production, National Security Agency. Kirby participated in the NSA's investigation of the attack and reviewed translations of intercepted communications between pilots and their headquarters, which he reports show conclusively that they knew their target was an American ship. Kirby is considered the godfather of the USS Liberty and USS Pueblo intercept programs. From telephone interviews with James Ennis and David Walsh for Friendless Fire, Proceedings, June 2003. In a handwritten note dated 26 August 1967 by NSA Deputy Director Louis W. Tordella, reacting to the Israeli court decision exonerating Israelis of all the blame for the Liberty attack, it is stated, quote, "A nice whitewash for a group of ignorant, stupid, and inept f***ers," unquote. By By now it seems that we've all been told the many and widely varying theories of the events of September 11th, 2001. The official story of 9/11 presents that a group of extremist Muslim terrorists known as Al-Qaeda, apparently translated as the Base, planned and orchestrated the attacks. Yet others have told us that among the responsible are U.S. President George Bush Jr., U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, and a variety of other criminal elements in the United States government. These two conceptions are central to the 9/11 story, while there is some argument on the latter side as to how the events took place. Some theories as to the science of the attacks have presented that the impact of two planes and a fire fueled by jet fuel, which is mostly kerosene, brought down 3 concrete and reinforced steel buildings. Those structures would be World Trade Center Building 1, Building 2, and World Trade Center Building 7. Others posit that controlled demolitions were planted in the towers, while still others have claimed the use of directed energy weapons being beamed into the towers to turn them into dust. Other possibilities have included the use of mini nukes or tactical nuclear devices being used in the basements of the buildings to weaken their foundation. Most recently, the idea that TV fakery was used in place of actual planes. In other words, the theory explains that by combining real explosions with computer graphic footage of fake planes, the criminals that pulled off the attacks were able to hoodwink the entire world. It is not in the scope of this video to prove nor dispute the science of how the towers came down that fateful day. However, it is our belief that among such theories, the case showing demolitions has been the most sound. Our intentions in this chapter are to specifically show you who was responsible for this mass murder of Americans. We will examine a group of people who are a corrosive mafia with a racial and religious cohesion. It will become clear how fraudulent theories concerning 9/11 have been fomented and end up benefiting this group, and how the foundational crime of September 11th has been the catalyst for multiple and far-reaching crimes by this well-organized supremacist mafia. It's time we achieve the long-awaited complete truth of what happened on 9/11, because the future of humanity depends upon it. There are 2 documents which are central to understanding the intricate planning for the events of September 11th. The first is titled A Clean Break, a new strategy for securing the realm, and shortened to the ACB doc. The ACB was created in Israel at the IASPS. The core of the document illustrated a systematic plan to conquer the Middle East by engineering a flawless image of Israel and promoting the state as a great ally of the United States. The ACB doc was essentially duplicated in the so-called Republican think tank called the Project for a New American Century, also referred to as PNAC. The same Jewish authors of the ACB doc wrote PNAC's paper called Rebuilding America's Defenses, in which they called for a catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. PNAC is at first called a Republican think tank, but finds itself later termed a neocon or neoconservative group. The reality is that neocon is just another layer of the onion that covers up the existence of the Jewish criminal network. So long as they keep calling the network anything other than specifically a Jewish criminal network, then their greatest strength, which is their racial cohesion, goes undetected. PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, was not a neocon or even a Zionist think tank, but a Jewish criminal think tank. This crime network existed long before Zionism was ever codified. Therefore, it is absolutely appropriate and necessary for us to refer to it as the Jewish criminal network, as opposed to merely using the term Zionism, although that term is sometimes employed. PNAC consists of several non-Jewish criminal personalities, but be certain that its primary function is to serve the will of the Jewish mafia and the terrorist state of Israel. Some of the Jewish members of the Project for a New American Century are Elliot Abrams, Paula Dobriansky, Robert Kagan, William Crystal, Richard Pearl, Peter Rodman, William Schneider Jr., Paul Wolfowitz. Preparation for the attacks of September 11, 2001 did not just come in the form of how it would be engineered, but how the resulting energy from the socio-political, economic, and emotional upheaval could be directed and utilized to the benefit of the criminal cabal. American policy would become neocon policy. Yet the term neocon, once again, is misleading, as what we are really talking about are the goals of a racist, supremacist Jewish power elite and the hundreds of thousands of everyday Jews who serve in their massive Sionim network. The power structure that would funnel the erupting force of 9/11 can be seen in the three distinct but interlocking categories. The first is the defense arm, with members Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Elliot Abrams, and David Wurmser. This group was tasked with orchestrating a policy of preemptive action toward the Middle East in order so it may be reformed or remade in their vision. They further sought to substantially increase foreign aid to Israel, encourage joint weapons development, open up doors for new homeland security business opportunities, and legitimize the genocidal takeover of Palestine. The means by which they would achieve these objectives would be through inserting themselves and their cohorts in think tanks, defense policy boards, Defense Department contractors, talk shows, and investment banks. The second arm of the cabal was to be the pro-Israel press, formed of David Brooks, Lawrence Kaplan, William Crystal, and Norman Podhoretz, among other numerous personalities. Their objectives were to create the idea of the danger of Islam, render all Arab governments illegitimate in the public mind, make illegitimate any land for peace initiatives, and secure the idea that our primary American objective must be to defend Israel. This was achieved through the American Enterprise Institute, Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, or JINSA, Heritage Foundation reports, as well as the Weekly Standard, The New Republic, Commentary Magazine, and through the American Jewish Committee. The final tentacle of the cabal is the group of columnists who directly swayed public opinion. Four major personalities, among others, are Robert Kagan, Charles Krauthammer, Max Boot, and William Safire. They sought to paint Palestinian militants as terrorists, create a linkage between 9/11 and all Arab governments, make anyone critical of Israel and the Jewish criminal mafia out to be an anti-Semite, and make Israelis heroes in the minds of Americans. The movie You Don't Mess with the Zohan, starring Jewish actor Adam Sandler, serves these final objectives expertly by slipping under the radar as mere entertainment.
He is the greatest Israeli soldier the world has ever known. His training is lethal, and his skills are legendary.
In October 2000, approximately 11 months prior to September 11, 2001, a former Israeli Defense Force, or IDF member, and veteran of the Yom Kippur War, 1973, was collecting English ivy cuttings at the Gomel Chesed Cemetery located at McKellen and 245 Mount Olive Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. The Gomel Chesed Cemetery is a Jewish cemetery. While he was scouting the cemetery for ivy cuttings, he overheard what he believed to be a conversation spoken in Hebrew, which drew his attention. As he watched and listened, a third man arrived to the meeting in a Lincoln Town Car. What the observer of these happenings heard, after normal niceties were exchanged between the three men, alarmed him. The man who arrived in the town car said,
"The Americans will learn what it is to live with terrorists after the planes hit the Twins in September."
One of the men that had been leaning against the retaining wall expressed concerns regarding whether the upcoming presidential election, November 2000, between Bush and Cheney and Gore and Lieberman could impact the plans. The man that arrived in the town car pacified the doubts by saying,
"Don't worry, we have people in high places, and no matter who gets elected, They will take care of everything.
According to his account, on 9th of February 2001, approximately 8 months prior to the airplanes being flown into the Twins, he sent an email to then Attorney General Ashcroft, informing the Attorney General that he had important terrorism-related information. The U.S. Department of Justice did not directly respond to the source. It forwarded the email to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Shortly thereafter, on 28th March 2001, the source received a letter from Arthur Radford Baker, FBI, informing him that if he had information to share, he should contact the FBI Newark Division. The source contacted the FBI Newark Division and was told that 2 agents would be in contact with him, but no FBI agents came at that time. The source continued to call the FBI Newark Division in an attempt to pass his information on to the agency. He wanted to do this in person to ensure that it wasn't carelessly discarded or dismissed. He also sought a guarantee of protection by the FBI. As September 2001 drew closer, he grew more impatient. He began to act with a sense of urgency because, in his words, quote, time was running out. As he was getting nowhere with the FBI Newark Division, the source decided to write a letter to Arthur Bradford Baker on 21st May 2001. The person that sent the letter advising him that he should contact the FBI Newark Division. In this letter, the source reiterated that he had important information to share with the government, but would need a guarantee of protection by the FBI before he could disclose all that he knew. On the day that the source received a response letter from Arthur Radford Baker, 26th June 2001, now less than 3 months prior to the 9/11 attacks, 2 FBI agents finally paid a visit. They were Agent Robin Gritz and Agent Andrew Stengel. The agents were shown the second letter received that day from Arthur Radford Baker by the source. The letter informed the source that the FBI would not be able to do anything on his behalf. Here's some intelligence concerning the NSA. Yet another report focuses on the Israeli-based private communications company Amdocs, where a number of 60 detained suspects worked. Most directory assistance calls and virtually all call records and billing in the U.S. are done for the telephone companies by Amdocs Ltd., which has contracts with the 25 largest phone companies in the U.S. and more worldwide. It is virtually impossible to make a call on a landline without generating an Amdocs record. Through Amdocs, it would be possible to keep ahead of investigators by knowing who they are calling. In 1999, the Maryland-headquartered National Security Agency issued a top-secret report warning that records of calls in the United States were ending up in foreign hands, Israel in particular. Investigators do not believe calls are being bugged, but the data about who is calling whom and when is very valuable in itself. On 10th September 2001, just 24 hours before the World Trade Center attack, the Washington Times ran an article quoting intelligence sources who described Israel's Mossad as, quote, a wild card, ruthless and cunning, and has the capability to target U.S. forces and make it look like a Palestinian Arab act, unquote. Moreover, they said it was generally known in the intelligence community that the Mossad had penetrated every Muslim organization and would have a little problem in finding any number of fanatics to carry out a suicide mission in the belief that they were serving Allah. As reported by Christopher Berlin on 12th September 2001, the internet edition of the Jerusalem Post announced that, quote, the Israeli Foreign Ministry has collected the names of 4,000 Israelis believed to have been in the areas of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon at the time of the attack, unquote. Yet only 1 Israeli was killed at the World Trade Center, and 2 were reportedly killed on the supposedly hijacked aircraft. Although a total of 3 Israeli lives were reportedly lost on 9/11, speechwriters for President George W. Bush grossly inflated the number of Israeli dead to 130 in the president's address to the joint session of Congress on 20th September 2001. The fact that only one Israeli died at the World Trade Center while 4,000 Israelis were thought to have been at the scene of the attacks on 9/11 naturally led to a widespread rumor blamed on Arabic sources that Israelis had been forewarned to stay away that day. Quote, whether this story was the origin of the rumor, Bret Stephens, the Post's editor-in-chief, wrote in 2003, I cannot say. What I can say is that there was no mistake in our reporting, unquote. As the world watched in disbelief and asked, how could this be possible, 5 Israelis, later discovered to be Mossad operatives, were seen dancing with joy. Fox News duplicated a report given by the New York Times. Little space was given to this information, but they did in fact state that, quote, a group of 5 men had set up video cameras aimed at the Twin Towers prior to the attack on Tuesday and were seen congratulating one another afterwards, unquote. Police received several calls from angry New Jersey residents claiming Middle Eastern men, quote-unquote, with a white van were videotaping the disaster with shouts of joy and mockery. They were seen by New Jersey residents on September 11th making fun of the World Trade Center ruins and going to extreme lengths to photograph themselves in front of the wreckage. Witnesses saw them jumping for joy in Liberty State Park after the initial impact. Later on, other witnesses saw them celebrating on a roof in Weehawken.
I wear my binoculars and I could see the towers from my windows. And this is where I'm looking. And all of a sudden, down there, I see this van park. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. And I could see that they were like happy. They didn't look shocked to me. They didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
We had received an all-points bulletin, and I just happened to see the van, and, hollered over to my lieutenant. I think that could be the van. We checked it out, and it was. We were all on edge, obviously, so I really wasn't looking to make friends with these people, and neither were the officers that I were with. Once we started talking to them, they were pretty much like, hey, we're not against you, we're with you.
And still other witnesses later saw them celebrating with high fives in a Jersey City parking lot. Another witness stated, quote, it looked like they were hooked in with this. It looked like they knew what was going to happen when they were at Liberty State Park. One anonymous phone call to authorities actually led them to close down all of New York's bridges and tunnels. The mystery caller told the 911 dispatcher that a group of Palestinians were mixing a bomb inside of a white van headed for the Holland Tunnel. Here's the transcript from NBC News.
Jersey City Police.
Yes, we have a white van, 2 or 3 guys in there. They look like Palestinians and going around a building. There's a minivan heading toward the Holland Tunnel. I see the guy by Newark Airport mixing some junk, and he has those chic uniform.
He has what?
He's dressed like an Arab.
The caller seems honest enough, but consider this. Why would the anonymous caller specifically say that these Arabs were Palestinians? How would he know that? Furthermore, Palestinians usually dress in Western-style clothes, not chic uniforms. Based on that phone call, police then issued a be-on-the-lookout alert for a white minivan heading for the city's bridges and tunnels from New Jersey. The description was given as this: white, 2000 Chevrolet van with urban moving systems sign on back, seen at Liberty State Park, Jersey City, New Jersey, at the time of first impact of jetliner into World Trade Center. 3 individuals with van were seen celebrating after initial impact and subsequent explosion. FBI Newark Field Office requests that, if the van is located, hold for prints and detain individuals. When a van fitting the exact description was stopped just before crossing into New York, the suspicious Middle Easterners were apprehended. Imagine the surprise of the police officers when these terror suspects turned out to be Israelis. According to ABC's 2020, when the van belonging to the cheering Israelis was stopped by the police, the driver of the van, Savan Kurtzberg, told the officers,
"We are Israelis. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are your problem."
Why did he feel that the Palestinians were a problem for the NYPD? The police and FBI field agents became very suspicious when they found maps of the city with certain places highlighted. Box cutters, the same items that the hijackers supposedly used, $4,700 cash stuffed in a sock, and foreign passports. Police also told the Bergen Record that bomb-sniffing dogs were brought to the van and that they reacted as if they had smelled explosives. The FBI seized and developed their photos, one of which shows Savon Kurtzberg flicking a cigarette lighter in front of the smoldering ruins in an apparently celebratory gesture. The Jerusalem Post later reported that a white van with a bomb was stopped as it approached the George Washington Bridge, but the ethnicity of the suspects was not revealed. Here's what the Jerusalem Post reported on 12th September 2001. Quote, American security services overnight stopped a car bomb on the George Washington Bridge. The van, packed with explosives, was stopped on an approach ramp to the bridge. Authorities suspect the terrorists intended to blow up the main crossing between New Jersey and New York, Army Radio reported, unquote. The Jewish Weekly called The Forward reported that the FBI finally concluded that at least 2 of the detained Israelis were agents working for the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, and that Urban Moving Systems, the ostensible employer of the 5 Israelis, was a front operation. This was confirmed by 2 former CIA officers, and they noted that movers' vans are a common intelligence cover. The Israelis were held in custody for 71 days before being quietly released. Quote, there was no question but that the order to close down the investigation came from the White House. It was immediately assumed at CIA headquarters that this basically was going to be a cover-up so that the Israelis would not be implicated in any way in 9/11, unquote. Several of the detainees discussed their experience in America on an Israeli talk show after their return home.
And at that point we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work. Now, Fox News has learned some U.S. investigators believe that there are Israelis again very much engaged in spying in and on the U.S., who may have known things they didn't tell us before September 11th. Fox News correspondent Carl Cameron has details in the first of a 4-part series.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Fox News has learned that one group of Israelis, spotted in North Carolina recently, is suspected of keeping an apartment in California to spy on a group of Arabs who the United States is also investigating for links to terrorism. Numerous classified documents obtained by Fox News indicate that even prior to September 11th, as many as 140 other Israelis had been detained or arrested in a secretive and sprawling investigation into suspected espionage by Israelis in the United States. Investigators from numerous government agencies are part of a working group that's been compiling evidence since the mid-90s. These documents detail hundreds of incidents in cities and towns across the country that investigators say, quote, may well be an organized intelligence gathering activity. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and or explosive ordnance units. Another part of the investigation has resulted in the detention and arrests of dozens of Israelis at American Mall kiosks, where they've been selling toys called Puzzle Car and Zoomcopter. Investigators suspect a front. Shortly after the New York Times and Washington Post reported the Israeli detentions last month, the carts began vanishing. Zoomcopter's webpage says, "We are aware of the situation caused by thousands of mall carts being closed at the last minute. This in no way reflects the quality of the toy or its saleability. The problem lies in the operator's business policies." Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, "According to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally." A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, "The Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target." The document concludes, quote, "Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives."
Evidence that Israelis had been forewarned several hours before the attacks surfaced at an Israeli instant messaging service known as Odago. This story, clear evidence of Israeli prior knowledge, was reported only briefly in the U.S. media and quickly forgotten. At least 2 Israel-based employees of Odago received warnings of an imminent attack in New York City more than 2 hours before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Odago had its U.S. headquarters 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. The Odago employees, however, did not pass the warning on to authorities in New York City, a move that could have saved thousands of lives. Odago has a feature called People Finder that allows users to seek out and contact others based on certain demographics, such as an Israeli nationality. 2 weeks after 9/11, Alex Diamandis, Odago's vice president, reportedly said, quote, "It was possible that the attack warning was broadcast to other Odago members, but the company has not received reports of other recipients of the message," unquote. The internet address of the sender was given to the FBI, and 2 months later it was reported that the FBI was still investigating the matter. There have been no media reports since. Odago, like many Israeli software companies, is based and has its research and development center in Herzliya, Israel, the small town north of Tel Aviv, which happens to be where Mossad's headquarters are located. Shortly after 9/11, Odago was taken over by Comverse Technology, another Israeli company. Within a year, 5 executives from Comverse were reported to have profited by more than $267 million from insider trading. Through Israeli venture capital investment funds, Mossad spawns and sponsors scores of software companies currently doing business in the United States. These Israel-based companies are sponsored by Mossad funding sources such as Cedar Fund, Stage 1 Ventures, Veritas Venture Partners, and others. As one might expect, the portfolios of these Mossad-linked funding companies contain only Israeli-based companies, such as Odago. The Israeli company Odago provided 2 hours advance warning to people on a buddy list. In addition to the Odago early warning, it is reported that the Tokyo branch of Goldman Sachs also released a memo on 10th September 2001 that warned its employees to steer clear of any American government buildings. Even if one believes that 19 hijackers, not from Iraq, Iran, or Afghanistan, but Saudi Arabia, were responsible for the events of September 11th, it would seem wise for us to at least hold the airport security responsible for letting those men board the plane. The airport security was handled by an Israeli company called ICTS. Ezra Harrell, a Jew, is the owner. The company is registered in the Netherlands and was employed at Charles de Gaulle Airport to screen passengers boarding U.S. planes. Most of its personnel are ex-Shin Bet officers. The company covered security at Boston's Logan Airport, where the American Airlines plane came down after flight attendants and passengers reportedly overpowered Richard Reed. You might recall Reed as the man who supposedly had a shoe bomb. If Reed was really dangerous and not just an innocent man the Jewish elite used to incite more fear of terrorism, why did ICTS allow him on the plane? Is ICTS's security really that shoddy? ICTS's own website states that it sells services to every airport from which the hijacked planes on 9/11 operated, including security services, and this is sometimes done through wholly owned subsidiaries like Huntley USA Corporation. It has been suggested that the incredible feat of hijacking 4 aircraft without a single arrest at the gate would require the resources of a nation-state. This is even more true with the revelation that at least one gun had managed to board a hijacked plane. One company had automatic inside access to all of the airports from which hijacked planes departed on 9/11, and to the airports used by Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, an Israeli company, one that Mossad agents could easily find employment with without the management knowing who they were or what their purpose really was. As an additional note to ICTS's complicity, hours before the House version of the first so-called Patriot Act went to a vote, technical corrections, quote-unquote, were inserted into the body of the legislation whereby foreign security companies, such as ICTS International, would be immune from lawsuits related to the events of 9/11. Talk about not being available for deposition. This Patriot Act legislation sleight of hand occurred before the inception of the 9/11 Commission, when fearless leader George W. Bush was still resisting the very idea of an investigation into 9/11. Hence, in the face of an institutional cover-up, citizens were denied the possibility of a discovery process which is normally afforded to litigants. Without such discovery process, ICTS International would never be compelled by a court of law to give testimony and show evidence related to the missing airport video surveillance tapes of 9/11 or any other aspect of security measures in place on 9/11. A few quotes to digest.
Evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide.
While an Israeli real estate magnate from Australia insured his 99-year lease on the retail space of the World Trade Center against terrorism, one of Israel's biggest companies pulled out of the North Tower just days before September 11th. Zim American Israeli Shipping Company, Incorporated, broke the lease when it vacated the rented offices on the 16th and 17th floors of the North Tower of the World Trade Center shortly before the September 11th disaster. According to intelligence, Zim's World Trade Center office space had been leased until the end of the year, and the company lost $50,000 when it suddenly pulled out in the beginning of September. The parent company, Zim Israel Navigation Company, is nearly half owned by the state of Israel, the other half held by Israel Corp. Zim is one of the world's largest container shipping companies, operating an international network of shipping lines. The Israeli company's move out of the World Trade Center 1 week before the attacks saw the forfeiture of $50,000 in broken lease fees. Zim has since moved part of its operations to Houston, Texas. FBI agent Mike Dick aggressively investigated this Israeli ring before and after 9/11. Like another investigator by the name of O'Neill, Mike soon found himself removed from his duties on the orders of the then head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division, Michael Chertoff, a dual citizen of Israel. Dick was very suspicious when Israeli movers quickly moved Zim American Israeli Shipping Company out of its 10,000 square feet of office space on the 17th floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, and subsequent forfeiture of a $50,000 security deposit when they vacated 1 week prior to 9/11. According to a CIA non-official cover or NOC source or NOC source who worked with Dick, Israeli movers moved explosives into the 17th floor office space after Zim moved out. After 9/11, Dick, as well as the CIA NOC, were harassed by their superiors on orders from above. Those orders came from the Jew Michael Chertoff. Dick was first relieved of his primary counter-espionage duties, eventually sent to Pakistan to investigate the kidnapping of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, and eventually buried in a desk job at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. According to the CIA source, Pearl was murdered because he was getting too close to the money trail that financed 9/11. The CIA source said, quote, "The same group that beheaded Pearl in Pakistan did the beheadings in Iraq," unquote. The source added that the beheadings were not Al-Qaeda. The CIA source, who emphasized his past Republican credentials, emphasized that Al-Qaeda was merely a list of arms dealers, mercenaries, drug dealers, financiers, and terrorists used by the CIA and Saudis during the Afghan Mujahideen war against the Soviets. The source also iterated that all the 9/11 hijackers had fake IDs. During a joint CIA-FBI operation against lead hijacker Mohammed Atta in Fort Lee, New Jersey in 2000, the CIA and FBI team leaders complained to their superiors that their operation was being photographed by Israeli agents, thus compromising the operation. The CIA source affirmed that the Israelis in New Jersey were providing cover for the future hijacker teams. O'Neill had discovered that some of his Al-Qaeda targets, quote-unquote, were involved in some very un-Islamic fundamentalist activities, including drug smuggling, teenage prostitution, and blood diamond dealing.
Los Angeles, 1997. A major local, state, and federal drug investigation sours. The suspects, Israeli organized crime, with operations in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Canada, Israel, and Egypt. The allegations, cocaine and ecstasy trafficking, and sophisticated white-collar credit card and computer fraud.
The financial trail led O'Neill to a network of bank accounts in London, Dubai, the Isle of Man, Guernsey, and Jersey. The network investigated coincided exactly with the activities being carried out by the Russian-Israeli mafia. Recall that the BBC reported on 23rd September 2001 that the so-called suicide hijackers were still alive. So were there any hijackers, let alone a lead hijacker? It appears the Jewish criminal network is inventing more villains. Who shipped out the steel rubble of the World Trade Center towers? That would be none other than Metals Management, headed by Jew Alan D. Ratner. The most critical evidence to determine what really caused the towers to collapse was quickly destroyed after being sold to Asian smelters. Ratner, of Metals Management, now merged with the Sims Group, and the New York-based Hugo New Schnitzer East, profited from this criminal destruction of evidence. Ratner sold the World Trade Center steel to Chinese companies, reportedly selling more than 50,000 tons of steel to a Shanghai steel company for $120 per ton. Ratner had paid about $70 per ton for this crime scene evidence. Another central element of understanding how the attacks could be pulled off by the Jewish power elite would be a careful review of the number of dual Israeli citizens serving in the various branches of our government. The primary question here is, how could a person be a citizen of two countries at the same time? It's abundantly clear that such a person would have their loyalty split between the country of residence and the other country they hold citizenship in. Therefore, whose interests would they be working for, the United States or Israel? As reported in a document titled The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, Harvard professor Stephen Walt and University of Chicago professor John Mersheimer focused attention on the strong Israeli lobby, which has a powerful influence over American foreign policies. They detail the influence the lobby has exerted, forming a series of international policies which can be viewed as in direct opposition to the interests and security of the American people. These acts and policies are more often than not carried out by U.S. government appointees who hold powerful positions and who are dual American Israeli citizens. Since the policies they support are often exclusively beneficial to Israel, often to the detriment of America, it has been argued that their loyalties are misdirected. A few classic examples can be cited here. Jonathan J. Pollard was an American-Israeli citizen who worked for the U.S. government. He is well known because he stole more secrets from the U.S. than has any other spy in American history. During his interrogation, Pollard said he felt compelled to put the interests of my state ahead of his own. Although as a U.S. Navy counterintelligence specialist, he had a top-secret security clearance. By my state, he meant the state of Israel. Literally tens of thousands of Americans holding U.S. passports admit they feel a primary allegiance to the state of Israel. In many instances, these Americans vote in Israeli elections, wear Israeli uniforms, and fight in Israeli wars. Many are actively engaged both in the confiscation of Palestinian lands and in the Israeli political system. 3 examples follow. Rabbi Meir Kahan founded the militant Jewish Defense League in the U.S. in the 1960s, then immigrated to Israel, where he was elected to the Knesset until he was shot and killed at one of the U.S. fundraising rallies in 1990. The Brooklyn-born rabbi shuttled between Tel Aviv and New York, where he recruited militant American Jews for his activities in Israel against Palestinians. He claimed to be a dual citizen of America and Israel. Another Jew, James Mahone, from Alexandria, Virginia, reportedly was on a secret mission to kill PLO chairman Yasser Arafat when he was shot in 1980 by an unknown assailant. When he was shot, Mahone held an American M16 in his hand and a U.S. passport in his pocket. Alan Harry Goodman, an American Jew who left his home in Baltimore, Maryland, flew to Israel and served in the Israeli army. Then, on 11th April 1982, armed with an Uzi submachine gun, he walked alone to Al-Aqsa, Jerusalem's most holy Islamic shrine, where he opened fire, killing 2 Palestinians and wounding others. Both the U.S. and Israeli governments played down the incident, as did the Jewish-controlled media. Most recently, U.S. Navy Petty Officer Ariel J. Weinman, while serving at or near Bahrain, Mexico, and Austria, quote, with intent or reason to believe it would be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of a foreign nation, Israel, attempted to communicate, deliver, or transmit classified, confidential, and secret information relating to the national defense to a representative, officer, agent, or employee of a foreign government, unquote. Weinman was apprehended on 26 March after being listed as a, quote, deserter by his command, unquote, according to the U.S. Navy. The information he gathered was supplied to Israel. On 22nd April 2008, Ben Ami Kaddish, a Connecticut-born U.S. dual citizen who worked in New Jersey, was arrested and charged with giving top-secret nuclear information and details about the U.S. Patriot missile to an Israeli agent, the same agent involved with the J. Pollard case. The espionage charges reportedly stem from acts committed in the 1980s. These activities, like the ones with convicted spy Pollard, were immediately denied by Israel. Pollard pleaded guilty in 1986. It is further reported that Israeli officials instructed Kaddish to lie to U.S. investigators. Kaddish was scheduled to be arraigned on Tuesday afternoon, 22nd April 2008, at U.S. District Court in Manhattan, authorities said. The examples of Kahan, Mahone, Goodman, and Weinman raise the question of when a U.S. citizen ceases to be, or should cease to be, a U.S. citizen. U.S. law at one time clearly stated that an American citizen owed first allegiance to the United States. A U.S. citizen should not fight in a foreign army or hold high office in a foreign country without risking expatriation. What happened? It was the 1940 Nationality Act. In Section 401E of the 1940 Nationality Act provides that a U.S. citizen, whether by birth or naturalization, quote, shall lose his U.S. nationality by voting in a political election in a foreign state, unquote. This law was tested many times. In 1958, For instance, an American citizen named Perez voted in a Mexican election. The case went to the Supreme Court, where the majority opinion held that Perez must lose his American nationality. The court said Congress could provide for expatriation as a reasonable way of preventing embarrassment to the United States in its foreign relations. But then something very odd happened. In 1967, an American Jew, Beis Afroyim, received an exemption that set a precedent exclusively for American Jews. Afroyim, born in Poland in 1895, immigrated to America in 1912 and became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 1926. In 1950, aged 55, he immigrated to Israel and became an Israeli citizen. In 1951, Afroyim voted in an Israeli Knesset election and in 5 political elections that followed. So, by all standards, he lost his American citizenship, right? Wrong. After living in Israel for a decade, Afroyim wished to return to New York. In 1960, he asked the U.S. consulate in Haifa for an American passport. The Department of State refused the application, invoking Section 401E of the Nationality Act, the same ruling that had stripped the American citizen named Perez of his U.S. citizenship. Attorneys acting for Afroyim took his case to a Washington, D.C. district court, which upheld the law. Then, his attorneys appealed to the Court of Appeals. This court also upheld the law. The attorneys for Afroyim then moved the case on to the Supreme Court. Here, with Supreme Court Justice Abby Fortas, Lyndon Johnson's former attorney and one of the most powerful Jews, casting the swing vote, the court voted 5-4 in favor of Afroyim. The court held that the U.S. government had no right to rob Afroyim of his American citizenship. The court, reversing its previous judgment as regards the Mexican-American, ruled that Afroyim had not shown intent to lose his citizenship by voting in Israeli elections. While Washington claims it has a good neighbor policy with Mexico, the U.S. does not permit Mexicans to hold dual nationality. The U.S. makes them become either U.S. or Mexican. You can't be both. But the U.S., in its special relationship with Israel, has become very sympathetic to allowing Israeli Americans to retain 2 nationalities and allowing U.S. citizens not only to hold public office in Israel, but to hold U.S. government positions as well. No other country holds this special exception to our laws of citizenship. So, you may ask, are there any other dual Israel-American citizens who hold U.S. government positions that could compromise American security? The answer is yes.